Okay, welcome everybody to our Tuesday Lunch and Learn. And we hope everybody has a good week. And thank you again for joining us. And once again, we hope that this time is working, Tuesday is working for everyone to be designated for special learning, limited Torah, things that will inspire our growth. So I'd like to discuss today an interesting topic, a topic that intrigues me very much. And just before I do, I just want to say that the words today that are going to be in the merit of Ayelech Chaya Bas Rosa, and the merit that she should have a complete recovery, refuah shlema, and the merit of the inspiration, the words of Torah spoken today, it should allow her to have such a refuah shlema. So what I'd like to do is to share with everybody today a concept which I found very meaningful. And the big picture where I'd like to go with this is that this idea that we know the purpose in life is to change. The purpose in life is to create ourselves to be greater human beings, which is really what we're trying to achieve. And sometimes we ask ourselves a question that maybe it's just too difficult, maybe it's just too hard, or how long does it take to happen? Can I really sort of transform myself in a way that's meaningful? So the Torah gives us a very interesting parsha, and we found it 2 weeks ago in Parshas Nausea, which describes for us something which I think is somewhat remarkable. And it's remarkable in the sense that we see to what extent a person can transform and be different in almost overnight. Now, it's not to say that growth is an easy thing. We know to sustain growth, it takes work, it takes practice, it takes flexing of muscles, it takes building of muscles. But we also have to understand that we too can transform ourselves in a very short period of time if we make correct decisions. And that's what I wanted to get into today. So what I'm speaking about specifically is I'm speaking about the parsha that deals with something called the Nausea. The Nausea was a regular Jewish man who makes a decision. And the decision is that he wants to remove himself from the physical world to some extent, and thereby for the next 30 days he's going to refrain from wine or anything made with grapes. That's going to include obviously grape juice, it's going to include vinegars, it's going to include anything where it just absorb the flavor of a grape. So it's not as easy or not so simple as it sounds, but primarily it's really saying for the next 30 days. It's a limited time period. It's 30 days. He says, I want to remove myself from wine. Now, accompanied with this is he now enters into a state called being a Nazir. We'll define what that means in a moment. What is a Nazir? And part of the process is for the next 30 days, he's not allowed to come in contact with the dead. Similar laws that the Kohanim have to follow. He can't go to funerals. Or the Kohanim, we'll talk about that in a moment. Another law that he has to have is he has to let his hair grow. He can't cut his hair for the next 30 days. But he's called, this process, which we saw in Parshas Nausea, is called taking on himself the vow of being a Nazir. And what I want to get into today is really, what does a Nazir mean? What's it all about? Why does Hashem give such a law? What are we trying to achieve through it? So let's just begin and take it from here. It says that, the Torah says that if a person makes this decision, and he says that he wants to refrain from wine and take upon himself the laws of a Nazir. So just to read what the Ibn Ezra, one of the great commentators, says about what happens, what does this process look like, what's the transformation? So he says as follows. He says, you should know, Ki kol bnei Adam avdei tavos ha'olam. So the nature of the human being is to go after the desires of this world. That God created a world of pleasure, a world, and it's a good world. As Jews, we don't reject pleasure. We understand that God created there to enhance our lives. He says the world is a world of enjoyment. The world is a world of ta'ava. It's a world where there are pleasures. But as we know in this world, pleasures are neutral. Desires are neutral. When used correctly, they can be a beautiful form to enhance and bring connection to God. However, when used incorrectly, we can take us away from our purpose. So the question really is, in this world, what are we going to be slaves to? Are we going to be slaves to our pleasures and desires, and that's what we're going to go after? Or are we going to say that I'm willing to rise above my desires? So the Ibn Ezra teaches us, he says as follows, he says, you should know that every human being, abdei taivas olam, every human being, on some level, is a slave to the desires of this world. V'amelech amiti. What's a true king? What's someone who has really achieved kingship in this world? What's the definition of a king? So he defines it and he says, a melech amiti, sheyesh lo nezer ateres malchus barosho. It's someone who has a nezer ateres. He wears a crown of kingship on his head. The word for crown is a nezer. The nazir, who has said, I want to separate myself from wine. Wine is one of the greatest pleasures of this world. It's probably one of the most difficult things to create in this world. One needs to take the grape and one needs to crush it and break it down and allow it to ferment in a certain specific way and can produce the most enormously fragrant and beautiful tastes, to such an extent where we know grapes one can buy for just a few dollars, but the wine that comes forth from the grape could cost, up to $100 or perhaps even more. Wine is seen as always one of the most extraordinary and elaborate and maybe expansive tastes of this world. So when the Nazir says, I want to separate from my desires. I love wine. Who doesn't love wine? Who doesn't love that fragrance? It's something the human being craves. But he says, I want to separate from that. So the way the Ibn Ezra explains, such a person, yesh lo nezer apteres malchus barosho. He gets a crown of nazirus on his head. In other words, he becomes a king. Nezer means a crown. A nazir is a king. Yesterday, he was a common person, but because of that choice that he wants to make, and the choice that says, I want to control myself. I don't want to be ruled by my desires. I want to rule over my desires. He gets the crown of a Nazir. He becomes a king. Real kingship is to be in control of ourselves. Not to let the desires of the hearts control us, but to control our desires, to rule over it. That's why, in fact, the word for king in Hebrew is the word melech. So melech is 3 letters. It's a mem, a lamed, and a chaf. The mem stands for the moach, the brain. Lamed stands for the leiv, the heart. And chaf stands for the kloim, which mean kidneys. So the way it's explained, the way our deeper sources, the Sfarim explain it, is that what's a true melech? A true melech is someone whose moach, his brain, rules over his leiv, his heart, which is an emotion. And brain and heart rule over kloim, kidneys. Kidneys always have to do with the source of physical passion. Kidneys are the place where liquid is expelled from the body, so to speak. Source of passion. So melech, a king, is mem lamed chaf. The mind rules emotion. Emotion doesn't rule the mind. Mind rules emotion. And mind and emotion both rule passion. In fact, that's why it's brought down that the human being is the only animal in creation that, in fact, walks standing up. And one of the purposes of that posture is that we should understand that the head has to be above. The head has to rule. The mind has to rule the heart, and mind and heart have to rule passion. We think about every other animal in creation, so they walk on 4 legs. There's a direct line between head, heart, passion. There's no need to rule over, there's no need to control. It's purely instinct. It's just whatever the body dictates, that's what it does. There isn't a need for self-control or restraint or to rule over. But the human being is different. the essence of what it means to be fully human, which means to allow ourselves to have Malchus, kingship, means that the head has to be above, head has to be above the heart, and both, of course, are above the lower part of who we are, which is the source of passion. The Gemara Nida expresses this idea also, I feel, very beautifully, where it describes what a baby looks like in the womb of the mother. So it says a baby is in the mother's womb in the fetal position, and we know now from sonogram exactly what it looks like, sonograms, exactly what it looks like, and the baby is there holding its head. And the Gemara in Nida teaches us that the reason the baby is holding its head, because intuitively, the baby knows while it's in the mother's womb, as it's still connected to heaven, the Neshama is still connected upward, that the source of really what has to rule the body, what has to rule life, are the ideas that come into the brain. Who I really am is where I am in my mind. My mind and the ideas that fill my mind are really what have to be what guide me and govern me. So the Ibn Ezra teaches us and says that the reality of life is that everybody has passions. Everyone has desires. Question is, what are we going to choose to be a slave to? However, what's a true king? A true king is one, he wears the crown of a nezer. He wears a crown. Anyone who frees himself from the desires of his heart, he frees himself from his passions. He says, I'm going to live by a higher standard. That's kingship. And that's what the Nazir is choosing to do. The Nazir is choosing to say, I want to control my desires. I'm not going to allow my taste bud or my eyes or my heart to rule me. I'm going to rule over it. And he expresses that by saying, I'm going to refrain from that most delicious food that God has given us called wine. And I guess we don't think about that so much, but wine is an extraordinarily fragrant and delicious creation that God has given us. And when he says he's going to refrain from that, he has actually granted himself the crown called Nazirus. So who is a Nazir? He is a king. The day before, he was just a regular person. But the Torah says the decision to rule oneself, the decision to rule over oneself, the decision to say, I'm not going to be subjected to passion, to desire, to what my eye sees and my heart is chumin, and what my heart wants. That decision elevates and relegates that person now to a place of kingship. You know, I remember one time reading a story about the great mashgiach in Jerusalem, Rav Shlomo Wolbe. And Rav Shlomo Wolbe, during the war, so he was in Sweden. He was actually originally from Germany, and he was learning at the Mir, which is in Poland. But when the war broke out, he couldn't go back to Germany, but he was able to leave Poland because he wasn't a Polish citizen. So he was able to find refuge in Sweden during the war, and that's where he survived the war, and ultimately built a girls' yeshiva there, and came to Eretz Yisrael, where he became the well-known mashgiach after. So he describes that while he was in Sweden, it was going to happen that the king of Sweden was going to meet the king of Denmark. Apparently the king of Denmark was arriving by train, and there was going to be a meeting at the train station between the king of Sweden and the king of Denmark. And he said that he went to the train station because he wanted to see kingship. He wanted to see people who are given this majesty in this world. In fact, we know we have a blessing that we're supposed to make when we see a king. And the blessing has to do with that. Hashem has given some dominion to Basar V'Dam, has given a certain degree of power and royalty and sovereignty to people, and there's something special about that, elevated about that. And so he went to the train station, and he says that it was one of the greatest disappointments of his life. He saw the king of Denmark get off the train. He saw the king of Sweden go up to him, shake hands. He said, all he saw was two old men. Two old men greeting each other. There was nothing that indicated kingship. In contrast, the Gemara tells us, it says, who are true kings? So Amar Abaye, the Gemara in Shabbos tells us, Amar Abaye, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva, Kulus Lahu. First of all, they say, Kol Yisrael b'nei melachim him. The entire Jewish nation are the children of kings. The Gemara in Gittin says, Amar le b'nolach d'robani ku melachim. Where do you know that the rabbis are called kings? Amar lehu d'chsiv ki melachim yamluchu. Jewish nation are kings. The rabbis are kings. You know, if one has ever been in the presence of some of the great Gedolim, whether it be Rav Eliyashiv or Vadi Yosef Zitzal, Zeh Chodesh L'Bracha, you feel you're in the presence of kingship. Because kingship is a function of ruling oneself, living by a value, a system that's higher than what we see. That's really what a king is. A king isn't only someone who's born into a royal family. Real kingship, spiritual kingship, the kingship of a Nazir, the kingship of the Jewish nation, the kingship of a Talmud Chacham, of a Torah scholar. That kingship is the kingship of a person reaching high for a vision in life and saying that that vision is what's going to direct me, that vision is what's going to rule me, that vision is what is going to dominate and govern my life. I'm not going to be ruled by my passion, by the lower part of who I am. I'm not going to be ruled by emotion. I'm not going to be ruled by false, incorrect ideas. I'm going to reach higher and be ruled by God's word. That person now becomes a king. And that's true kingship. That's what the Nazir is shooting for. So let's just think about this for a moment. The day before, he was an ordinary person. He was a regular Jewish man. The decision to say, I want to achieve a higher form of living. I don't want to be ruled by my heart and my desire. I'm going to refrain from wine. That one decision overnight, the Torah says you've transformed yourself into a king to the extent whereby what? You wear a crown. You are now in the world of kingship. You are a melech amiti, the Ibn Ezra tells us, a true king. Sheyesh lo nezer ateros malchus b'rosho. You have the crown of kingship on your head. Kol mishu choshim minatayvos. Why? Because you said, I want to free myself from the control of physical desire. I am going to rule myself. I'm a king. That's royalty. That's malchus. And that's an extraordinarily unique Jewish vision, where we all have this inside of ourselves to be kings. And the kingship can come overnight. And the kingship can come through one decision. Decision to say, I want to be in control of me. Now, let's just take this thought just a little bit deeper for a moment and just see how far it goes in the ability that we have to transform ourselves with one decision. So we know that one of the restrictions that a Nazir has is he can't come in contact with the dead. So we think about it, who does this sound like? Well, it sounds like a Kohen. We know that the Kohanim, the priestly class, those whose job it is to dedicate their lives to the service of the Mishkan, and then of course the Beit HaMikdash or the temple. The Kohanim, because of their purpose, their function in the Jewish nation, and thereby the focus that they need, have certain things that they're not able to do. One is that they can't come in contact with the dead. And perhaps the reason for that, because there are many reasons, but just to explore one idea, It's because there's something about coming in contact with the dead which has a feeling of limitation. One looks and sees, well, life has a gvul, life has an ending. And it's a little bit shocking sometimes to see. You know, that sense of, well, I could achieve so much in this world, but when it comes to an end, there's something which causes a little bit of a fear and a maybe a little bit of moment of hesitation. Want us to sort of regrip, and nonetheless, life is meaningful and purposeful. The Kohen, whose job it is to be constantly focused, to elevate the Jewish nation to such a high place spiritually, can't have that distraction. Therefore, the Kohen is not allowed to come in contact with the deceased, has restrictions about even being in the presence of where someone is buried, going into a cemetery, things like this. Kohanim have many limitations in that. But it's a restriction because of their position, the position that demands from them a focused approach to this world. However, a regular Kohen is allowed to come in contact with the deceased if it's a very close relative. For example, if it's a spouse, it's a wife, it's a mother, a father, if it's a, God forbid, a child. The Kohen is allowed to attend those funerals. However, there's one Kohen who is not even allowed to come into contact with what we call the close relatives. Wife, mother, father, brother, sister, children. One Kohen has to refrain even from being in the presence of those very, very intimate and close relatives. Who is that particular Kohen? That's the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol has restrictions above and beyond the restrictions of the regular Kohen. Now, the Nazir, when he makes his decision to say, I'm choosing kingship, I'm choosing elevation, I'm choosing a life where my body doesn't control me, but I control it, he can no longer come in contact with the dead like a Kohen. But not just like a Kohen. What type of Kohen? The Kohen Gadol. He becomes on the level of the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. Why? To the power of one decision. He's elevated to a Kohen, but not any Kohen, the Kohen Gadol. Because he's saying, I'm choosing kingship. I'm choosing to be in control of who I am. And how deep does it go? How far does this go even? So I'd like just to quote to you from the Shloah HaKodesh, and I would like to thank my friend Rabbi Gladstein for pointing these Mar Makomot out to me. The Shloah HaKodesh, David Horowitz was one of the rabbis, one of the chief rabbis of Prague in the 17th century, first part of the 1700s, 18th century, and known as the Shloah HaKodesh because of his work, the Shnei Lukos Abris. His name was David Horowitz. And he writes something very fascinating. He says, what's going on over here? He quotes the Zohar, and I'd like to say the Zohar to you just to understand how deep it goes when a person makes a decision to say, I want to control myself. So he says this decision is extraordinarily transformative. He's choosing to refrain from wine. Well, why wine? Well, we mentioned earlier that wine is, of course, a delicious taste. It's something which is the body has a natural desire for, and maybe it's maybe the most symbolic idea of refraining from physicality. But he says it's deeper than that. He says to understand wine, we have to go back to the Garden of Eden. In the Garden of Eden, we know there was a tree the Eitz Das Tov V'Ra. Question is, what was that tree? So there's a debate amongst the rabbis what that tree was. Was it a fig tree? Was it a wheat tree? Was it an etrog? Or was it grapes? It's a four-way debate as to what it is. It's not an apple. Anything but an apple, that's some Renaissance painter's depiction of the word, what he thought the word eitz means, which means fruit. But our sages do debate and discuss it. The Zohar seems to, when the Shloah quotes it, seems to take the position that it was grapes. And then what did Chava do? What did Eve do? Eve took those grapes and she squeezed the grapes and she created wine. And when she presented Adam with the fruit, what she was presenting Adam with was actually a cup of wine. And of course, when he drank that wine, he had violated the prohibition of eating from the tree. So according to Zohar, really what the fruit was the squeezed grape, the wine. Now how interesting it is. What's the Nazir saying? The Nazir is saying, I want to refrain from wine. I want kingship. I don't want to be ruled by my desires. So the Zohar says when he's doing that, what's he doing? He's really bringing himself back to the world. What world? The world of the Garden of Eden. And what part of the world of the Garden of Eden? The world of the Garden of Eden where Adam was in control of his desires. Before eating of the tree, we know that the Yetzer Hara wasn't inside of ourselves. The Yetzer Hara was external. Adam had intellectual tests, but didn't have the test of desire. That was a function of the sin, the function of ingesting that fruit. So when the Nazir says, I want to control my physicality, he's bringing himself back to where? He's bringing himself back to the Garden of Eden. But not just back to the Garden of Eden. He's bringing himself back to the Garden of Eden, to a place where Adam was in control of himself before he drank of the wine. So therefore the Nazir is saying, I'm not going to drink the wine. I want to be like Adam before the sin. And it follows so beautifully. That's why the Shloah tells us he can't come in contact with the dead. Why? Because when did death enter the world? Death entered the world as a consequence of having eaten from the fruit. We know that once Adam ate from the fruit and the Yetzer Hara was internalized, and now there's a fight of passion inside of himself. So God institutes certain consequences, which aren't as much punishments as much as they're corrections. He needs to correct himself. He has to understand where now God's word is and where is his desire and passion ruling. And that's a fight and a challenge we all face. But death ultimately really is one, not just punishment, but is a corrective. Because if we think about it, perhaps the most important moment of life is the moment just before death. Because at that point where a person has to say, Hashem, it's all you. Any false idea that I had, any false idea that was based on my desires and passions and lusts and wants isn't true. It's all you. It's only you. Death is an important corrective to the sin, not just a punishment for the sin. But before eating of the fruit, there was no death. So when this man says, I am choosing control, I'm choosing elevation, I'm choosing to rule over my desires, he becomes a king. But not just any king. He becomes a Kohen. Not just any Kohen. He becomes the Kohen Gadol. But not only does he become like the Kohen Gadol, he transports himself back to the Garden of Eden. But not just to any point in the Garden of Eden. He transports himself back to the Garden of Eden before Adam ate from the tree, before there was death in the world. He does that all through the power of one decision. A decision that says, I want to be in control of myself. He achieves that level. That's the capacity that God has allowed us to transform ourselves so quickly and so easily. Now, I say this not because transformation is easy. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, we have to be real and say, change isn't so easy. But at the same time, we have to understand the vision that God is putting forth and saying, the choices that we make are so meaningful. And to never underestimate the power of those choices. The choice here is simply the choice to say, I'm going to refrain from physicality. I'm not going to be a slave to my desire. God says, you've achieved at that point kingship. You've achieved a level of the Kohen Gadol. Not only that, you are now temporarily in a position where you have the holiness of the first man, Adam Rishon, in the Garden of Eden before there was the sin. before he ate, before there was even death. That's where you transported yourself to. That's the power of a decision. That's the power of transformation that can happen when a person says, I want to control myself. I think the lesson that we need to derive from this is that we have to be able to understand, number one, our decisions are so meaningful. And to understand that whenever we make those choices to say, I'm going to control myself, I'm going to rule myself, that in God's eyes we have done something enormously large. And we have to understand that in terms of our own perfection, inwardly, an enormous transformation has just occurred. And there's so many ways in which we can choose this. It doesn't have to be just by separating from wine. We sit down to eat, and before our eyes and our taste buds and our salivatory glands start kicking in, we say, God, I want to express gratitude to you. That's self-control. Before we leave the table, now we're satiated and no longer sort of need to ask God for anything because we feel content. We stop and say, wait a minute, God, I owe you something right now. And we sit down and we carefully thank God for the food, for the land of Israel, for the Torah, for all the good he gives us, only because he loves us, the 4 parts of Birchat HaMazon. Whenever someone says something to us, could be Lashon Hara, something we shouldn't hear, and we turn away and say, I'm choosing self-control. I'm not going to listen. Or perhaps if something enters our field of vision, something we shouldn't see, and we say we're going to choose self-control. We should understand in these little choices that we make, they're not little at all. These choices are massive, they're huge. They're spiritual explosions in which, like the Nausea, we transport ourselves. Where? To the Garden of Eden, before there was sin in the world. We transport ourselves, transform ourselves, becoming like a Kohen, but not any Kohen, the Kohen Gadol. And we achieve that beautiful quality of kingship. We become a Nausea in some level. We get a Ateret Aroshenu, a crown on our head. And we become really what the Jewish nation is all about. To be Melachim b'nei Melachim, to be kings, to be queens, to be princes and princesses, the sons of kings and queens. I thank you so much for listening, everybody. Look forward to continue this discussion in a different way, but in a similar vein when we meet again next Tuesday.